Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writing Bodies. Kaya from Wajak Noongar Budja. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of where I live, work, and play, just north of Borroloo, near Gulagulup. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Taranaki toku manga, ko Tiatiawa toko iwi, ko Daley Rangi toku ingoa. With me here tonight is Caitlin and Melissa.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi. So, my name's Caitlin. My pronouns are she, they. I'm on Ghana land and want to pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. For those who need it, I am a white woman with a very round face, glasses, tits for earrings, blonde hair, and a very big plant behind me.
Excellent. My name is Melissa, or Mel. I am coming at you from Wurundjeri land in Narm, and I have curly dark hair with some fading green ends, a very round face and glasses, and I'm a white woman.
And the deeper voice you heard at the start is me. I'm shaven head, wearing glasses and a bright red lipstick, a very long beard, it's growing, currently cockatoo earrings and a floral outfit with some plants behind me, and feeling ready to go. I suppose a good place to start when talking about bodies is, you can start from kind of the angry place, but I suppose what brings you joy about your body? Or maybe if it's all rage, what brings the rage, Maybe we can go straight for it.
Yeah. Melissa, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Sure, I will. For me, it's I would say equal measures of both. It's a real 50-50 rage to joy ratio, which is always shifting. But I think a lot of what brings me joy about my body are its capabilities and its mere existence. And those are a lot of the same things that give me rage about my body. The parts of me that exist that I wish didn't, the things I can do and have to do and don't want to, or the things that I can't do because of my size or my shape or any of those things.
Yeah. I think for me, it's been a tricky one to just consider joy or to consider joy when I live in a body that has a chronic illness. So I have endometriosis, and it's one that physically causes pain. And then to live in a big body as well, it's hard to achieve even body neutrality, which has been such a big thing that's come up over the last couple of years, when my constant neutral state is, I'm a 4 out of 10 of pain most days. So to find joy in that is quite rare and exhilarating when I do find it. And then the rage comes from just the existence that I am in, and then also the society that we're in for almost demonizing both of those things. So it's a battlefield, So there's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely agree. I think for me, it's a lot about kind of, that kind of passing, not quite black, not quite white, not quite here, what is it? Who are you? What do you want from me kind of thing? So that's kind of one level of it. And there's the level of, living with a brain that, within neurodivergency is always wanting to do something that, might not quite be acceptable for those around you. And kind of also the choices that, one does being non-binary and perhaps exploring the wearing of things upon one's body that can bring violence or threats or uncomfortability for one reason or another, but then in equal parts, the joy that you can find within feeling comfortable within oneself when you're out on the street, and really kind of balancing, I suppose, is there a price too high for the privilege of owning yourself, Do you find that there's almost like a day-to-day protest kind of being in your body at all? Like a micro protest, maybe?
Absolutely. And I've written about this before. It's just even just the moment you wake up and you do a check-in with your body to see where it's at, and being cool, how are we going to navigate throughout the day? And most times it's a thing of like, oh, okay, we're doing this again, fine. And almost protesting in that sense. But then it's almost a protest to then get out of bed and be like, no, we're doing this and we're going to be okay with that. Yeah.
Do you find there's kind of like, there's like one level of just surviving, and then there's actually a whole other mountain to climb when it comes to thriving within that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes from like not only just having that chronic illness, but then also being in a society that, in terms of like bigger bodies, like society is not made for us. It's just not. And to even try and communicate that to people who aren't aware of that is, I keep going back to minefield and battlefields because it is a bit of a battle. Just like everywhere you're telling me like, oh, but like you're not fat, and it's like, the fat's not a bad word. Like, come on, you've got to take 10 step forwards to meet me where I am. Instead, you're just kind of continuing to close in.
Well, so I suppose it's all fine to go, fat's not a bad world, but then everything around you is saying that fat is a bad world. Like, I'm, quite large in my personage, and I also try to find dresses to wear. Like, this dress here is actually made from 4 Target shirts by a friend of mine. But it's interesting how those shirts are actually got bought from the Mr. Big section, or even if you go to like, Kmart, and there's the curves section, the bell curves, and it's just, and the language isn't, the actual words aren't necessarily hurting, but it's the way in which they're implemented, and the fact that you kind of put off to the side, you don't get any nice clothing. And clothing's like one kind of very privileged thing to talk about, but it's interesting how it all kind of comes down from there. Do you find issues with just being able to wear something outside?
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely something I've experienced and struggled with my entire life. And it's funny when we say fat isn't a bad word, that's definitely true, but that is such a recent development, right? Like, I don't know how old everyone here is, but I'm 30, and within my lifetime, it was a bad word, and I'm still grappling with the aftershocks of growing up feeling that. And if you like me grew up in the 90s and early aughts, you grew up during the heyday of the obesity epidemic scare tactic era, in the like heroin chic 90s and whatever. So those are definitely things I think a lot of us have internalized, and I myself still haven't even uncovered the tip of the iceberg of the ways in which that affects my day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that like being able to come to terms with fat just being an adjective is something that's a very recent development for me as well.
Yeah. 100%.
And it's interesting because like I was having this conversation with my brother the other week. So I've got 2 younger brothers, and like we're all in a bigger sizes. Like we're all 6'2" and above to start off with, and then add on top of that fat bodies. And even just the way that he spoke about it was like, oh, I haven't heard language this like almost damaging from someone in a while. And then just gently calling him out on it and be like, actually think about it in this phrase, maybe your brain will treat yourself a little better. And society will hopefully follow. But it's so hard unlearning all of the like stuff that was put on you as you were growing up, because we grew up in a phenomenon of diet culture. And it's still out there, which is terrifying.
And I feel like we learned it through osmosis. At least I'm only speaking to my own experience, but I learned it through like, everyone around me and how they spoke about their bodies, and the bodies I saw in media, and the bodies that were presented as good, and the ones that were bad, the ones that were the butt of the joke. And since I learned it like gradually and subtly, it feels like the unlearning of it has to be gradual and subtle too, which is so frustrating because I just want to rip it off, but it's so slow and painful. And part of the difficulty is we're not all speaking the same language. Like, it's funny because I was talking to a person who, fine, I'll just say it was my therapist. I was talking to my therapist. I didn't want to call her out like this, but whatever. And I was talking about some of these issues, and I said something about like being fat, and one of the only ever like benefits to it is getting the Pfizer shot early or whatever. And I was like interrupted and told that that was terminology I wasn't allowed to use, and that the terminology was like people living in larger bodies. And it was just this weird experience because I was like, but that's not my preferred terminology. Like, we can't even agree on the vocabulary. How can we tackle the issue?
I mean, I'd almost prefer them to be like citizens living lives within terrifying flesh vessels before I use that kind of terminology. You know, like,
I mean, that is the first time I've heard that terminology. And like, I just want to question where that's coming from, because like, you might not be living in a bigger body and have that experience. And you could be the one setting that phrase and using that terms, and all of that's internalized fat phobia ever anyway, because a lot of people have it. So it's just, I got questions about that term.
I personally would hate it if I had to refer to myself as a person living in a larger body. Like, that's great if someone else wants to use that, but that's not my descriptors, and I would hate it. So it's just,
I suppose there's kind of that kind of sovereignty over what terminology you get to use to describe yourself, you know, because you're kind of taking charge of your body. I always find it interesting when there's kind of conversations, and it's kind of settled down a little bit now that we're seeing a bit, I don't know, a bit more kind representation within media and art. I use the word kind and not necessarily. There's been a bit more kindness towards historically underrepresented communities, but where with like Māori and Pacifica bodies kind of constantly being like, you know, fat and therefore the butt of jokes. And it's interesting to think about, you know, the history of that, because it's like, well, yes, there is a history of us, you know, consuming unhealthy food, but that's because it was brought, you know, with you, and kind of, and because of due to, you know, social class, that's also sometimes the only food that can be afforded because it's so cheap. And it's interesting how within, you know, the throes of colonization, not only was there spiritual and cultural kind of destruction, but just the pure experience of living in bodies was made to be a lot harder. And even if you could come to terms with your body, you were then shamed for it. Do you find that within kind of like previous comedy work that the body has kind of taken a real, how do you deal with body and kind of comedy, Melissa?
That's so fascinating. Sorry, I'm still processing what you just said, because that was really interesting to me. Something that it brought up is that, yeah, one of the reasons it's so hard to talk about fatness is we're not just talking about an identity, because it's something that changes, which is what's so fascinating and singular about bodies, is they change. Like, my gender identity may or may not change. My race isn't going to change, but my body will. So it's like, yeah, anyways, you just blew my mind thinking about that. In terms of comedy, yes. It's something I've only started to think about seriously recently, is how I treat myself on stage. And because I'm a comedian, I'm a stand-up and an improviser. And, you know, I never want to be on stage with someone who's going to make me and my body the butt of their jokes. But only in recent years did I start realizing, well, that means I can't do that to myself either. Because, you know, I used to think, oh, I'm taking these cheap shots at myself, but it's okay and it's subversive because I'm saying it. But yeah, I think something I'm working towards comprehending more of is like, to what extent is that okay? You know, punching down is punching down, even if it's at yourself.
Do you find that there's a complexity in kind of unpacking now then how you even write characters that are living in larger bodies, as your therapist, you know, used the term? Like, how do we actually, you know, unpack this in our work and art and media? Is there a way to unpack it that feels right? Or is it just us kind of taking control of our own identity and story?
I don't know. I would say that I think on some level it's hard for me to write characters that aren't fat. I mean, I do it all the time, but yeah, and it's put me in a really interesting position, especially in the screenwriting world, because recently I pitched a project to a producer here in Australia, and several of them loved it. The project was like about a fat activist, and it was sort of about bodies and fatness and weight loss and gain and the internet and feminism. And some people loved it and they were like, amazing. We need to have this conversation in Australia because we're lagging behind in that area, which we are. And then a few producers would not go near it with a 12-foot pole. They were like, no, 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 no. And it's really fascinating to me because I think that reaction, that fearful one, is different than it used to be. It used to be like, people don't want to see fat people on TV. We're not going to talk about it, shove it away and hide it. And now it's like a fear of getting it wrong and facing backlash. Because I think we've seen several examples of that recently. You know, there was Insatiable. There's all kinds of Rebel Wilson films that mean well, but don't treat fatness with the kind of like thoughtfulness that it deserves. And now that's like an additional barrier. It's like, come on, do we have to have more barriers to entry here for representation? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
I reckon it does. What about you, Caitlin? Does that kind of, is there almost a kind of, I mean, intersectionally, this kind of, those conversations are still unfolding in regards to disability, and kind of when you're experiencing all of these things kind of toppling on top of each other, how do you kind of write these characters that feel real and right, or works that feel, I don't know.
Yeah. What do I think? I think a lot of the writing I do in the terms of poetry is always coming from myself. So it's the representation is inherent. But when I'm writing for just like characters and people that aren't me, or aren't a representation of myself, it's very open to interpretation. Like I leave it as a blank slate as possible in terms of gender and in terms of body, and race and sexuality and all those kind of things, where it's the idea of like anyone can actually play this, but they have to be like, obviously have to connect with the story and what's happening. Yeah, I actually don't think I've really thought about it outside of myself now that I am answering it.
I have a question. Oh, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just fascinated by that. Do you find then that it's harder to tell specific stories about specific experiences if you're leaving those blank to where anyone could fill them in?
No, because I think I write a lot about love, and the idea of just like being a human and human connection and emotions in that sense. And I think I hopefully leave it open enough that once someone is cast in that, they can take it and mold it so it reflects them and their experiences in a place where they're safe and it is representative of that work and brings them more into the conversation, because a lot of the work that I do is collaborative. Like there isn't a hierarchy. It's everyone's in the room. We're all doing the things. So I think the way that I write when it's not for me is that it's almost like a groundwork and it's building up from that. Yeah.
Well, and since you're talking about love a lot, that is like quite a universal experience. So it makes sense that it doesn't matter to you what specific archetype fills that spot.
Yeah. It's a
hard. How do you find your kind of work responds, if at all, to kind of gender and body? Do you find that that's still kind of involved, only because it plays a huge role in mine, but in kind of that really liminal queer gender space? But just thought I'd open the floor in regards to gender.
Yeah, I think this has been something I've been thinking about quite a bit else as well, because I've had a couple of experiences in the last couple of months where I've been misgendered, and I've never been misgendered before in my life. So it was a new sort of experience for me, one of these things of like, wait, what? And then that has just brought back so many thoughts about like, how am I presenting? What am I looking like? Like, is it my body? Is it the fact that I have a mullet? Like, what's going on here? And I think it's yet to translate into my writing, because when I write about gender and about queerness, it's so separate to when I write about body. Yeah, I don't know. What about you?
I've only just started kind of really delving into poetry. Like only in the last year have I kind of jumped headfirst into a kind of more personal way of making, because I suppose with making, I've made a lot of solo works and written plays. They're always for someone else. Like, directly. With a play, the audience is going to be right there, and there's actors who are performing these parts, and everyone's almost kind of, even if it's like about something that you experience day to day, everyone's kind of right there and on it and experiencing it, and you're directly feeding into it. Whereas I've found with writing more kind of short stories or fiction or poetry, even if someone reads it, like I'm not going to know. So there is this kind of more, I don't know, I find there's a juicier place I can go to. Or even with slam poetry, it's more like I've got you for 2 minutes. You know, what should we explore and play with? But you know, I think I've really, because I'm living at that weird intersection of, you know, being Māori and non-binary and, you know, having autism spectrum disorder, neurodivergency, like it can become complicated to try and escape that, you know, in the personal writing, go, oh, I just want to write about trees, but is that person reading it going to think that I'm talking about, like, you know, that I'm kind of referring to all these intersectional identities within that? And maybe I am, but it's like there's some days I just want to be able to escape the body and have the privilege of just writing something that doesn't get seen through a political lens. But then I'm also like, it's also valuable to make these challenging works and write this kind of uncomfortable stuff, because it does, you know, hold up that mirror and encourage people to think differently. And hopefully there's some, you know, non-binary kid out there who reads it and goes, yes, I can do it. I can be the way I want to, you know. But again, even where I live right now, there is kind of like a real, speaking specifically from a kind of non-binary, a queer, be it an address kind of point of view, there's still a real simmering violence when you go outside. So there's kind of this argument that we've reached all these milestones and solved all these issues and everyone's free to be how they are, but actually it's kind of just a blanket that's been put over the fire, and now that blanket's starting to set itself on fire as well. I don't know if you've got any experiences related to do you find that, you know, I mean, just to kind of dip our feet in, body and violence like plays into your work at all?
Yeah, I think gender and body can't be divorced, really. I mean, I think they're so intrinsically linked, even when we don't want them to be or when we do. And I think that, you know, even though I'm cisgendered, that plays into my work a lot, because to me, fatness, a lot about it is about femininity and like what women are allowed to be like in society, you know, and like you're already like transgressing some unwritten rule about what a woman should look like when you step outside your door and, you know, aren't a size 8 or whatever. So yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover there. And that's really fascinating to hear you say that. I love the metaphor of the smoldering blanket. And you just know the rest of society is going to be like, that's okay, I've got another blanket. Let's just put another blanket on it.
Well, I mean, I always make the argument, if my ancestors wore pretty much close to nothing sometimes, like, and ultimately wouldn't have cared what I wore as long as I just did the work and was part of society. And, you know, in this case, telling the stories on behalf of the iwi, you know. But it's interesting how, you know, how I think, I don't know, it's almost like there's a threat. People feel threatened for some reason by it. Do you feel people feel threatened by your bodies at all? I know that those, you know, big groups of boys on the street feel super threatened by my dresses for some reason or another. But
I think yes, and I think do I? Wait. I think yes, and I think that sometimes I play with it in my writing, particularly in terms of queerness. There's been a couple of pieces where I specifically like reference wearing heavy boots and like crushing spines with them, and it being quite visceral and being a presence. But the reason I hesitated is because I know that people, like, I've just been referenced so much as this like Amazonian warrior and goddess, and it's like, that's lovely and I love that, but also okay,
pressure.
There's discomfort in that, like, clearly as well, like on a whole bunch of levels there. Yeah.
And it's like really nice, but it's also like why do I have to be elevated into the sense of like of goddess when I can't just be this like big 6'2" person who's just hanging about? Like why does it have to skip that basis and go straight to like the heavens?
Yeah. Why can't you just be a lovely, kind human being that just gets to exist rather than a constant kind of plaything for society and media? Do you find that, I mean, obviously things are fluid and change as the years go by, and especially in the previous couple of years, I feel people have maybe stepped back and had to think about attitudes, maybe. I'm not claiming anything. What do you feel about exploitation of the body? Like, is that just by the media kind of taking bodies and using them in their own kind of ways? Like in regards to writing, do you find if you're applying for a grant or an opportunity or a residency, or do you feel like you have to kind of exploit yourself in a way to get somewhere using the kind of identities or parts of your body? Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. And this is, you just keep hitting the things that I've been like thinking about over the last like 6 months, which is great. The disability chronic illness is one that I think about quite a bit, particularly in like ticking boxes and getting like residencies and grants. Because like the illness that I live with is not classified as a disability. And there are times where I don't think it should be, but then I question, is that internalized ableism? And it's just a whole bloody spiral. Yeah. Particularly when I know of other people who have this illness who do tick that box. But when it comes to ticking the like LGBTQIA plus box, I am 100%, I'm smashing that button. Like if you want me to be your gay card, I will be your gay card. Yeah, and I think I've started putting like fat into bios just to see how people would react to it and if that would change anything. But then there's that double-edged sort of like, why should I have to tick these boxes in order for you to fund me and my artwork? Can't the being of just who I am and who my art is enough? But then it all ties back into it. Yeah, what are other people's thoughts?
I don't know. It's a topic I've also thought a lot about. It's really complicated for me because I don't know if fatness is a disability. Certainly for some people it is, and for others it isn't. It's really interesting because it kind of sits at this intersection of like identity and impediment, and also it's really complex. And like I said, part of that is because it's something that's in flux. Bodies naturally like shed and gain weight over time, but that may or may not change your identity as a fat person, the number on the scale. So I don't know. I do include it occasionally in applications, especially when I think the work I'll be making is about that. And I do that for the simple reason that fat people are massively underrepresented in society, in media. There's very much this like implicit go home, shut yourself in and eat yourself to death. We don't want to hear about it type attitude. So I am conscious of wanting to like increase that representation. And so that's why I include it.
Or at least kind of work towards representation that feels honest and true, and actual like main characters and leads that they're kind of living their lives without, it always falls back into some kind of joke often. At least once in a TV series with and it's different if you're kind of exploring the jokes which society might put onto the character, but it's interesting, how those characters always seem self-deprecating and we don't actually get any deeper than just that skin kind of level.
It would be so great to watch a show with a fat person on it who's not trying to lose weight, who's not sad about being fat, it's not about their fatness. They're just living their life, right? But with any kind of representation, that's like the bar you can't get to till you cross the very basic one of like actually seeing people. Same with people with disabilities, same with all kinds of stuff. It's like you don't get to be people outside of those labels until we've seen enough people with those labels so that we can stop fucking talking about it,
Has there been any media or art, live art or writing or books or any kind of yum consummation of great representation that you've seen? And this is to do with just bodies, like whether it's fatness or disability or gender, race, like any kind of these beautiful bodies that are kind of underrepresented, at least here in so-called Australia.
Yeah, for me, a really formative one was Lindy West's book Shrill, which is about feminism and fatness and the internet. And then it became the series Shrill, which is in the US. But I really can't think of any examples here in Australia. I mean, at least of shows. But Shrill is like one of a kind, and I hope there's more like it.
Yeah, I'm racking my brain. The only one that I could think of as we like started this conversation was, oh my God, what's her name? Beanie Fieldstein in Booksmart, where it was like her body never came into the conversation, which I loved. One of the kind of words and representations that they do froth over every time it happens is just use of the word bisexuality. Whenever that's dropped in, there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, yes, I am seen. And even that's kind of cropped up a little bit more, which is nice. And it's kind of losing that bubble of it being about like loving sex and promiscuity and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, it's just being bisexual. And the only versions that kind of pop up into my brain again are all American media.
Shout out to Alana Glazer in Broad City for our bisexual representation.
Yes, it annoys me that I can't think of anything. All I can think of is like examples of like you could have just had it in there. Like it's not that hard. You'd hope it's not that hard. Even just down to like extras. Like if you scan a screen and you try to find extras that look like you and you can't, it's like, okay, well then something's up with your casting because that's a deliberate choice. Yeah.
I'll just throw in Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You.
I was about to say that.
It's a little bit left field, but in terms of kind of attempting to reclaim body integrity and control, and not so much even, the journey towards revenge, but kind of a journey of what life is and how you can kind of live life in the way that you want to. And I think as someone who has had similar experiences, I think just beautiful, but also I think quite breathtakingly challenging to the hierarchy of media in general, and, awarded and bowed down to for a reason. But I think also just something that's unafraid to be really brutally funny about some really brutally truthful stuff.
And that's
also, go for it.
I was just gonna say that's a show that is 100% about body. It's about race, it's about gender, it's about her body and what has happened to it, and sexual assault. It's an incredible piece of work.
I haven't seen it.
Highly recommend everyone
top of the list.
Watches it after this panel. If you don't, the three of us will knock on your door and politely ask you again to watch it.
It's brutal though, so give yourself.
Oh yes, 100%. Do take it slow and look after yourselves. I suppose, what's your kind of, is there any work that you're making at the moment to do with body? I think it'd be great to unpack kind of what's happening in the present for you, because you could all be well and good saying, this is what I've made, but what are you right now, what are you in the midst of in regards to either coming to terms with your body through writing, or just generally not even thinking about art, but oh my God, my body.
What about you?
That's a very loaded question.
Yeah. The kind of throwing back to how I introduced myself earlier, outside of this space, still with us, but outside of the recording thing, in the last couple of weeks, I finally realized that I haven't been taking my own artistic practice as seriously as I want to. Producing has kind of taken over a lot of that, which is great. I love that. I'm getting paid. It's beautiful. But sometimes I want to work on my own stuff, not other people's. And that work is an anthology. And I've been thinking a lot about how, let me step back a couple of beats. I've been thinking a lot about casting bodies and casting people and how to represent that and put them in spaces, particularly because one of the works I'm working on at the moment and this one that I'm developing myself both involve a lot of movement. And I'm just very sick of seeing just like white, thin, able-bodied people on stage. And I've been thinking a lot about how to change that, because I am in a place where I can change that and can choose who is representing the work that I am doing and the work that I'm involved in. So at the moment, the thing I'm working on is, go.
I was going to say, we've had the past several hundred years of that on stage.
Yeah. And I just had this moment where I was like in this conversation with these other people and I was like, and they were like, yeah, these two people. And I'm like, I'm like not interested in that. They look exactly the same. Like, no disrespect to either of you. I think you're great, but I am not interested in seeing you on stage for an hour. Like, no, thank you. And they took it really well, which was nice.
But there is that wonderful kind of like, actually, it's now the time to be just honest and still being kind about it. But actually, absolutely. You know, we can't lie to you anymore about what we're wanting to see. What about you, Melissa?
I think everything I do is about body in one way or another. But the project I'm most excited about right now is I'm pitching it as like a limited series, but when it inevitably fails to get funded or a producer, I will make it on my own as a web series. But it's about role player games, or like live action role play. And that is a concept that fascinates me because there's so much symbolic resonance in like how we exist every day as humans playing these roles than, you know, putting forward this like performance of gender or of whatever, and any performance, the performance that I'm smarter, that I'm funnier, whatever. And it's a way to like kind of peel back those layers and talk about that in a setting that's still really funny for me, which is like reenacted medieval battles. So
what is interesting with a lot of people, like I find, you know, having played a lot of kind of, for example, Dungeons and Dragons and similar kind of stuff, the kind of how far people will go to be not themselves in really some often positive ways. Sometimes it's like, whoa, slow down. Like, but actually how people in these rooms can become other things that they might actually struggle to deal with in real life. They may actually struggle to deal with people who are actually maybe not, you know, other fantasy races, but actually, do you find that, like, what's your experience of kind of, have you played a lot of like kind of role-playing games and have those experiences? How do you find people?
It's very funny that you say that, because as soon as you said that, I was like, whoa, shots fired, because my D&D character is so different from me. I play like a, you know, skinny, sexed up bard, classic stereotype there. But it's funny because I play, or at least I designed this character to be satirical. Satire is a huge part of my practice. And yeah, so it's very fun for me to have this like mouthpiece to say all the terrible, awful things, and then to like let him get messed up in battle. Or like something we've been doing recently is like, he'll say something terrible and someone in my campaign will hit him and I won't try and defend him. I'll be like, yes, give me those damage points.
It's almost like a masochist, this one.
It's very funny. Shout out to my campaign. It's called Bardic Inspo, and we do Shakespeare D&D. We stream fortnightly. But yeah, I think what you're saying speaks just to this like human experience of what storytelling is. It's a chance to escape the prison that is our bodies and inhabit something new, a new character, a new lifestyle, anything.
Do you think that kind of, and feel free to like play into, like jump into this, Caitlin, I'm not sure your experience with role-playing games, etc. But like, do you think, like, interestingly, like things like Dungeons and Dragons are great ways to build empathy in a way, and maybe even more realistic human characters within that? Do you find you could build empathy with this? Do you think it could be a tool used to help build empathy within people, or not?
Personally, I don't know. I'm not sure I think so. I don't really know if you can build empathy. I think you either have it or you don't, but I think you have it by experiencing the world and people different than you and being open to new experiences. So, I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to like a psychologist on that because I don't know.
Well, I was wondering whether, we could use Dungeons and Dragons as therapy, but that's a whole other kind of discussion.
I think it probably would work for a certain kind of person.
Kind of works as therapy for me every Sunday night anyway. I'm kind of like, this is just a great thing for the social life.
There definitely is therapeutic role play. That's such a thing. Whether or not you can do that like while rolling a D20 is another question, but maybe. Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on that, Caitlin?
I think I played it once when I was 13, and I've been trying to get a group together for like 2 years. So I'm sitting here with like a lot of envy, being like, I want this. So the answer is no, but I do find a lot of kind of commonalities in so I like read and watch a lot of sci-fi and enjoy Star Wars quite a lot. And like if you look at the medium of like fan fiction and people trying to escape themselves and their worlds and create characters for them, it sounds quite similar in that sense of creating a character and a universe and a world for yourself where you can escape what you're doing and like what aspects of yourself you choose to keep and what aspects you choose to kind of leave behind.
Great. Do you I mean, when we're moving towards the kind of the end of the session now, I was wondering in regards to kind of, I suppose, writing bodies specifically, with the work that you both do, is there any advice, suggestions or tools that you have found are really useful to tackle this kind of stuff? For me, it's kind of boils down to just try and be kind, because I can be because honesty is good, but if there's not a bit of warmth behind it, I find it gets me nowhere, as useful and cathartic as it is. But do you find there's any suggestions or advice or tools?
When you say that, do you mean kind to yourself or to others?
Both, I think. I think, trying to be kind to myself and my poetry, even if it is really like kind of almost politically grandstanding protest, is still, I find I still got to have community and care in that, because in protesting with and for my community or for rights, I can't forget about, I can fight against the kind of oppressor, but I can't forget about the community that I have to care for as well. And I think it's a fine balance. It's like that metaphor of, it's almost like tug of war. So we're all on one side of the rope, and it's okay for you to take a rest because someone else will step in. But knowing that when that person has to step out and rest, you're there to kind of pick up the slack again. And if you can't hold the rope, then you're back there cooking some food for everyone to eat while they're on the rope, and the kind of hierarchies of what you can do to look after community and care. I think that's all in the word kindness for me. But what about yourselves?
Beautiful. I don't know that I have advice per se, because I haven't figured it out, but I would just say, write what interests you. And for me, like there's a whole world of unpacking to be done on this and everything, the way society treats it, the way I treat it, the way I feel because I think society's thinking this, etc. There's so much to unpack, and that's what interests me, and that's why my writing is often preoccupied with it. So if you're lucky enough to not feel that, your writing has to be focused on your body and your experience, then write other things, right? Wherever the pen takes you.
Yeah. I think I'm going to echo that advice of kindness, but particularly towards yourself, because writing about the body can be a lot, particularly when writing an art can be used as a form of escape. But like the one place you can't escape is your own body. So be kind to that and no limits. And then also when performing it, particularly for audiences listening to it, to like kind of what am I trying to say? I think I'm trying to say not to like acknowledge someone for their body, I guess is where I'm going with this. Like it's not a brave, tremendous act for me to talk about weight. That is just a thing that I am doing. And yeah, I don't think there's any use in congratulating me in that. It's more like learning more about it rather than being like, oh my God, you're so brave. Like, I don't care. They've made this choice. It doesn't make me brave.
Such a goddess. What a brave goddess.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. Like, I never perceived you as that. And it's like that. You've got some things you need to address, my friend. That's not on me. That's on you.
Yeah, for me, I'm always like, have you had your eyes checked? Because here I am.
Yeah. Yeah. But just being kind. Yeah, that's a big one.
Are there any final thoughts that have popped up kind of throughout this conversation about things that have gone in your head at all that you might want to share with our lovely, wonderful crowd out there?
I think we've talked a lot about the experience of living in a bigger body, which is something I'm absolutely Googling after this. But for those who do not have that experience, that's still, like, you should still be looking towards your own body and your identity in that sense, whether that be through gender or size or internalized fat phobia. I think that's a really big thing that I want people to go away thinking about. Yeah. There's just so much. We've had a great conversation.
I mean, bodies are complex. Everybody's different. There's 3 very different bodies in front of you, but we are 3 out of however many billion. So it's like, you know, hopefully some stuff has been sparked within this conversation. Were there any final thoughts for you, Melissa?
No, just that I love reading work about people's experiences. And if your experience is as varied as our bodies are, then I can't wait to read it. Get out there and write it.
Great. I thought I might just finish with a little short excerpt of a poem I wrote. I know it feels very but I thought after what we've talked about. It's from my poem Fluid, which has the phrase, "Why you big brown bearded boy," wear a dress throughout it in regards to the various assaults I've been through, you know. A very powerful, wonderful poem I really enjoy doing. But at the end, I kind of hit with a bit of softness and kindness. So I think I'll leave you with a bit of softness and kindness here. My gender, my body, is fluid. It is akin to water. It slips through my fingers and takes many forms. It is, I am, you are, a destructive force of nature and a wonder to behold. Soaked in our labors, we glow. Thank you so much for tuning in to Writing Bodies. I'm Daley, and I'm here with the wonderful folks Melissa and Caitlin. Hope you've had a great time and hope you have a great festival as well. Go and listen to something that you never thought you'd enjoy. That's my hot tip. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.